Thanks for braving the wind. The wind on these, the wind has always been like that in Davis this time of year, but the combination of drought and then fire and smoke, and then the stressed trees dropping limbs, and then the dust. And that's climate change. It reminds me of like when I was in Tegucigalpa like 20 or 30 years ago in Honduras, like 20, 30 years ago. And the area around it had been logged out and it was just desertified, and there was this intense winds and the dust was everywhere. And you can't say that the winds are a function of climate change, but the factors are multiplicative, and the intensification of it's occurring, and it's happening right here in our lifetimes. And we have so little time to act. So just that happy thought for you for today, but it's something we have to be thinking about. We have so little time. Anyway, that's what I'm thinking about today. That's my mood. Draft paper is due on Wednesday, as you know. I'm going to do another quiz on Friday through Chondrichthyes, that is through today's lecture. Please read the next chapter in Helfman, chapter 13, representatives of primitive fishes, which we'll come back around to some of them on Wednesday's lecture. And then a cool paper from Science on collapse and conservation of shark populations to supplement today's lecture and Megan's on Friday. And then also a really kind of cool but very sad article on sawfish and like their cultural resonance, and particularly in Africa, and the sort of declining populations. They're very much endangered. So that's the list of things you have to do. I want to do a little bit of catch up. We've kind of sort of charged on. This is back from the Devonian, these questions, but just to have that quick discussion, because these are the kinds of questions I'd like to ask on the exam, integrative questions. What can you say about the life history of these two fishes? Folks, what'd you put down? We have a reef fish, squirrelfish, and we have a sturgeon. And they have very different body morphologies. And what would you characterize as the differences? Like, first off, what are the differences in what they eat? Yes, sir.
The sturgeon is more of a bottom-feeding fish.
That's right. It's got a subterminal mouth, right?
Whereas the one above most likely an ambush prey.
Yeah. And what would you say about their body morphology to support those sorts of attributes? What would you call the body morphology of the sturgeon? Yeah.
It has kind of like a punch up, so basically it allows it to kind of like be down. Also, you see the purple on the sturgeon that allows it to kind of sense and taste. Yeah.
That's right. The little structures here, they're sensory structures. Help it feel along the bottom and also smell. Okay. What else about the shape of these beasts? What? Fusiform shape, yeah, fusiform. So this is interesting. Why would an animal like this have a fusiform shape? Yeah. Yeah, against running waters, right? Because it's a fish that's anadromous. So it goes out to sea or out into the bay, but it comes back up into the rivers. You don't see a lot of fins highly placed or like very like mobile fins in the pectoral pelvic for like a predator. They're kind of rigid fish. It's an ancestral fish, but you do see everything placed back here, which allows it to move. And so it's the difference between a sort of fusiform fish that might be a predaceous fish, like a gar even, or a pike, and something like this, which is a bottom feeder but adapted to swift moving waters. As opposed to this one, what kind of waters what kind of structure waters would you expect that to live in and navigate? Oh, yeah, it has the highly forked tail, right? It also has like the anal and the second dorsal are very, very, so like really intense, quick bursts of movement. But what about the pectoral and the pelvic fins? What about the placement of them? Posterior or anterior?
Their anterior body, and they can be used for steering or braking the
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, keep going. Yeah. I just want to highlight the pectoral fin here. It's right here. It's a section right there. It's kind of thin and long. You can't see it, but it can flare out. It's quite broad, and so it's used for for maneuvering in the environment. And so it's a fish that has quick bursts of movement, ambush predator, but can also maneuver around a complex coral reef or rocky reef environment, right? What about the eyes? What would you say? What would the eyes tell you about it? Yeah.
That even what the like the well, if I'm confident what I feel probably more has like a little white, but like you help see it around. So if you blood on it, kind of see. So for example, if you're talking nocturnal and those certain have much more eyes.
Probably doesn't need the eyes. Instead, it's got these tendrils down here for sensory, and it's got the lateral line is very well developed. Probably has a little bit of electroreception as well, but that one has the big eyes and also colors, right? Maneuvering through its environment based on colors, relating to other conspecifics using color. Any other observations? Yes. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, although, yeah, I guess you could characterize like this one. Although this one, this fish never really transits. It's bolt and turn. It's stop and start. So, but it probably relies heavily on flicks of the tail, combined with movement from the pelvic and pectoral fins to deftly maneuver through its environment. So this is the key. These are the kinds of questions that I'm going to be asking you. I want you to think about, like, you should be able to pick up a fish whether you're not and you're in the lab. You should be able to look at a fish and go, okay, well, what's it doing in its habitat here? There's a famous story about this Agassiz, the famous fish biologist and geologist from Harvard. He was kind of a dick. He was wrong about a lot of things too. We should probably stop mentioning these old white dudes. But he did do this. He had this there's a story about him where if he wanted to take a grad student, he would give the poor kid a fish, and he would walk out and he'd come back at the end of the day and say, "Tell me everything you know about the fish," which is kind of a crummy thing to do, but it's an interesting story, and it's true. And then he'd come back at the end of the day, and the prospective student would tell him everything that he could think of about the fish based upon physical structure and the gills and the guts and everything. And then he'd say, well, come back tomorrow, and he'd give the guy the same fish. Tell me some more. Anyway, but this is the idea, whether or not it's apocryphal story. The idea is to be able to relate ecology to form, and to think about it from not only an ecological sense, but also an evolutionary sense. And that's really the goal of the class, for you to be able to do that. And I spent a little too much time on that, so I'm going to talk about the extinct ancestral fishes on another day. And let's march right into Chondrichthyes. I haven't talked much about fish art. Sharks are a good place to start back into it. Sharks elicit so many weird responses in human beings, and they respond all different kinds of art, from the extremely tacky to the sort of horrifying to Baby Shark. If you have kids or been around them, you know about Baby Shark, which is a horror all in itself. Here's a more sober art piece, sort of disturbing. This is by Damien Hirst, an American artist, called "The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living." So it's a conceptual art piece, and they threw a big tiger shark. The artist wanted something big enough to eat you. They threw it in a tank and pickled it in formaldehyde. And the idea is that it would, the idea, at least on the placard, was that the viewer could view the pickled beast and get a sense of their own mortality. And also at the same time watching the decay, because the shark degrades over time. in the imperfect solution it's in. And so they would get a sense of like, well, even this ultimate predator was subject to the powers of mortality and decay, even when it's pickled. But I interpret it differently. I'm more dystopian, of course, a dystopian view of it. To me, it's like the control of nature. You know, it's the fear and the idea of, you know, from the artist, you know, sort of his own subconscious insecurities about control of nature, control of predators. People are obsessed with sharks. There's so much to unpack here, because people are obsessed about sharks because they can eat you, because you're not an apex predator when you're in the ocean with a shark, at least some sharks. And I think that really fascinates and disorients people. And I haven't gone swimming with a white shark or a tiger shark. I have swum in a roundabout aquarium tank with a very gentle 7-gill shark. And once it goosed me as I was swimming along. I was volunteering working in the tank, and it goosed me as I swung along, and I nearly jumped out of the water, and so did the shark. You know, we both went boo to the opposite ends of the tank. And it was a disorienting feeling, even though that was a piscivorous fish and certainly not a threat to me. It gave me the willies. And there's a famous story about an aquarium director who will go unnamed, who was obsessed with finding a white shark and putting a white shark on display. There's been a few people who've wanted to do this, never successfully. And when he would get in the water, because they had to have people working with the shark to get it to ventilate, to get the water to run through the gills. When he got into the water, the shark would go nuts. It would suddenly bolt. This very sort of like declining animal would kind of just react really intensely. And because this guy who was obsessed with sharks was both fascinated, excited, and afraid. And of course, sharks can detect your fear. They have those ampullae of Lorenzini, these electrical sensors. And so, you know, your heart's beating fast, your muscles are tensing, the animal senses it, you sense it. Anyway, sharks put people in a weird space. Maybe a healthier approach is that taken by one of our native sons here, Ray Troll. Ray Troll is a whimsical and lighthearted artist who's obsessed with sharks and fish, evolution and conservation. Here he got really obsessed with this fossil shark that was discovered that had jaws that were designed to work a little bit like chainsaws or a saw. They could roll in and out and cut things up. And so he got very fired up by this idea, and then he did a few paintings of them showing these massive, crazy jaws. And then he just does whimsical things like this. He's very popular among fishophiles for the sorts of evolutionary, quirky puns, visual puns. He's called deeply weird. Yeah, that's a critic. And then of course, this is a famous fish biologist and like slogan. You'll see it on doors everywhere still. And it is wrong, but we can't help it, right? We know it's wrong. It's hard to stop. So anyway, that's art. Let's get into a little more of a little more sharks. So as you know, they're thought to be about sharks as a group. Excuse me, not sharks, but the Chondrichthyes. So the Chondrichthyes, of course, includes elasmobranchs and holobranchs. And the Chondrichthyes is a group about 450 million years old, probably back in the Silurian, but it was in the Devonian when there was this massive radiation, and we have undisputed shark fossils that continued through the Carboniferous up to about 300 million years ago and into the Permian. At the end of the Permian was a massive extinction that led to sort of a new geologic era. Modern sharks survived that, and they've been radiating steadily ever since through the Jurassic and Triassic into the current time. There hasn't been the massive wild radiation that we've seen in the teleostean fishes that we'll get to a little bit later, but there has been, it's a very successful group, and things like hammerhead sharks have radiated out fairly recently in evolutionary time, since the big KT extinction 66 million years ago. Oh, and then this is just a note on a very eccentric shark, Stelocanthus, which had these weird structures. It looks like an ironing board attached to its head that may have been like part of its courtship. It didn't make it. We don't have it around anymore. So anyway, this is just the, I just wanted to kind of contextualize where we're at. Here, the age of fishes, the Devonian. These are our cartilaginous fishes, which we're talking about today, and the major radiation occurring through this period I just spoke about here. And on the tornado of time here, that puts us at sharks emerging about here in the Silurian, and then lots of sharks through the Devonian, up through the Permian, where we had a contraction, and then a sort of re-radiation up through the present day, up through the Cenozoic. Okay? Just a quick refresher on classification. I'm going to refer to these things. You know, there's the whole domain, kingdom, phylum, class. We're going to talk a lot about classes, and then subclasses, because sometimes we just had to wedge in an extra group in there because the phylogenies wouldn't work without it. Families, you always know we're talking about a family when the ending of it, excuse me, you're talking about an order when the ending of it is a forms or formies, and families end with an ide or ide, and then genus species. But truly, I'm not that interested in the structure of this. Like, I don't need you to know like what classification order level it is, because it's changing all the time anyway. I just need you to understand the relationships and the basic hierarchy of it. And this is where we're at on the chart that I get put in the syllabus here. So, you know, we've discussed the agnathans extensively. We've discussed some of the ancient fishes, and today we'll deal with the first group of gnathostomes, the Chondrichthyes, the holocephali, the elasmobranchii. There's two main groups. There's the Gallia and the Squalia. And in short, the Gallia are the classic sharks that are up in the water column, that are sort of laterally compressed or fusiform in shape. And the Squalia tend to be sort of depressed bottom feeders or bottom dwellers. So let me tell you a little bit about class Chondrichthyes. As I just said, sharks, skates, rays, and chimeras. There's 14 orders, over 1,200 species. They're mostly marine, but they involved in freshwater systems as well. And of course, the classic characteristic is that they have cartilaginous skeletons. They have paired appendages and mouths that bite, versus like the agnathans, which just nosh because they don't have jaws. That was a major evolutionary advancement for these fishes. And they have placoid scales, which are very much like little teeth or tiny tough keels. And the key features of the elasmobranchs in general are their singular teeth, which we'll talk a little bit about, electroreception, their fins, and their reproductive methods, all of which are interesting and unique. So this is a very full slide, I apologize, but the teeth are probably derived from scales, and they're replaced like scales serially. So they get they roll forward into the jaw and fall out, or they get knocked out, and they're replaced by new scales, aka teeth. And there's some suggestion that taste buds then evolved from the teeth, which evolved from scales. And they shed them constantly. So here I've got a note that ground sharks shed about 35,000 teeth in a lifetime, and continuing to replace them as they go along. And there's 4 basic types of shark teeth, and I don't need you to know this, but there's dense and flattened, needle-like, triangular, and then load and non-functional. So in the basking sharks, whale sharks tend to be filter feeders, so they don't really use their teeth. This is worth noting, the way that the pointed lower with triangular upper teeth work is on white sharks. For example, they've got these really gnarly giant teeth on the top, and they fit into this sort of snaggly row of much smaller teeth. They sort of fit inside a little pocket there, improving their ability to bite. And then they're largely they feed on large fishes and mammals, and so they need that kind of intense grasp. Whereas blue sharks and bull sharks are piscivores, and they need needle-like teeth to be able to grab onto their prey. Yeah. I'm sorry. Oh, the energy required to generate the teeth. That's a really good question. You know, they tend to have fairly low metabolisms. You know, they osmoregulate passively. As I spoke about, I think last week, you know, their osmoregulation which normally is a really energetically demanding problem for most fishes. They do it somewhat passively by storing wastes like urea inside their bloodstream. So they're sort of osmotonic with the surrounding water. So that's one way they require less energy. And then, and they tend to live in oceans in cool waters, although it's not really true. They live in tropical waters as well. But yeah, that's a question I don't have a good answer for, other than the fact that they're somewhat efficient. And it does seem like a huge energetic cost, but maybe it's not. Yeah. The scales? Oh, well, they're just, they fall out. You know, they're designed for failure, right? So I guess, you know, another way to think about this is that the teeth are the main mechanism. Like, they don't have hands, they don't have arms. The teeth are the main mechanism through which they derive nutrition. And so they're going to invest a certain amount of resources into those teeth to be able to maintain them and keep them up, because a snaggly tooth shark without a row of teeth in the front is not going to be a successful shark. It's going to die. And it's, you know, conspecific, slightly mutated shark that was replacing them has essentially more fitness. It has an adaptive fitness that would allow it to survive. And so evolutionarily, we can think about it as being, you know, essentially, it was an adaptive trait to be able to continually replace teeth for a large predator. Why that's the case with sharks and not other large predators, I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with the, yeah, I don't know, I'd just be speculating. So I want to talk about some examples. So some examples of teeth. These nurse shark have the dense flattened teeth that are used for like crushing invertebrates. Blue sharks, these are the needle-like teeth I was speaking about, great for piscivory. And then here's the great white with the large, giant, pointed, triangular upper teeth with the pointed, snaggly bottom teeth that make it so crazy looking. And then basically in a basking shark, they don't have teeth. They're very, very recessed. And they have gill rakers for filter feeding. Fossil teeth are very well preserved in the record. So this has given us a great indication of when sharks showed up. And it's allowed us to some degree, calculate size and what they're feeding on. And because the soft parts, the cartilaginous skeletons don't preserve well, but the teeth do. And so these have given us a lot of information. In some cases, like Carcharacles megalodon, which is the sort of proto-white shark you've surely seen in the media. There's been, you know, that's basically all we know. All we know. It has a jaw structure that looks like a white shark, and so we've inferred the shape and morphology of it. And then they calculated the length of the fish based upon the size of the teeth. And the first calculations were way off, wholly exaggerated for drama. And since then, we've got a better sense that they're not as outrageously, you know, they're not 5 times the size of a modern day white shark. They're only 2 or 3 times. So our participation question today, which is up on the website, and I'll let you think about this. Why would a giant fish like this go extinct? What is it about this animal? It lived 2.8 million years ago or 28 to 1.5 million years ago. It's closely related to white sharks, but why wasn't it successful? I'll let you ponder that and put that in as your participation question today as I move on. So the other superpower that sharks have are the ampulla of Lorenzini, which I've mentioned. They can sense electric fields. And you can see on the photo in the background here, these little pores on the snout are all the ampullae. They have a sort of a canal that connects to the surface. It's filled with this jelly-like liquid that's electroconductive. And then they have a nerve attached to it. So they can sense these electrical fields from animals in distress, muscular contractions, wounded animals that help them detect potential prey. So that's why, you know, that's why when you go swimming in shark-infested waters, you don't thrash, you stay calm, right? And they're found in other fishes as well, particularly lamprey, sturgeon, and lungfish. Another fascinating thing about sharks is they have internal fertilization. And this is very cool. Almost all, in fact, all the Chondrichthyes, as far as I know, do have internal fertilization. They have these fins down below the, before the anal and just in between or behind the pelvic fins. These are claspers that they use for mating. And there are two ways that the young develop. There's oviparous development, in which the female has internal fertilization and then she lays eggs. And you may have seen these eggs called mermaid purses colloquially. And sometimes you'll see these spiral-shaped cases. You'll see them up on the beaches. But each one of those is an egg case, or rather it's an egg. There's usually just one, sometimes more, juveniles developing inside. And the other means of reproduction is ovoviparous. And in this, the eggs and the embryos develop within the female and she gives live birth. And this is probably the commonest means of birth in the Chondrichthyes. And so the nutrition comes from the yolk in the egg. And when the yolk depletes, oftentimes the female will have, I guess I talked about this in another slide. Let me wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I have ovipary, the mermaid's purses, and you can see a variety of them here. The structure is very species dependent, and so you can identify them based on the structure. And they have these tendrils, and the idea of the tendrils is that they attach to substrate. A lot of the times sharks will reproduce in specific habitats, like particularly like a warmish area, a cove or a beach, or subtidally on a beach, where the water's a little bit warmer to assist development. And so they can't just have mermaids' purses floating around. Otherwise they would wash up and end up high on the beach, which they do sometimes. So they have these tendrils that can attach to structures to hopefully keep them in place. And then the corkscrew shapes are really curious. These are usually laid by bullhead sharks or hound sharks, which is a benthic species. And they will lay these eggs and then pick them up with their mouth and then sort of carry them over to like a rocky reef and wedge it right in to a couple of rocks so that it stays secure there. So presumably they adapted for that very purpose, maintaining them in place. Ovivipary, there's several different levels of ovivipary. And the first level is just yolks and egg inside the female and they give birth. So this is like in whale sharks and spiny dogfish and nurse sharks. And then there's matatrophy. Matatrophy, there's a placenta-like structure. And so when the yolks run out, somehow the yolk, the remains of the yolk sac will be attached to like sort of a pseudo placenta. It's a little bit different it's very different than a mammalian placenta, but it's a very vascularized structure so that nutrition can get passed and wastes can be exchanged through this vascularized interface and the larvae can develop. So that's found in nurse sharks and also in dusky smoothhounds, these two examples up here, where we have a variety of essentially lesotrophy and matatrophy. The weirder version of ovivipary occurs in mako and thresher sharks, where there are unfertilized eggs that are produced, and the fertilized larvae that develop then feed on the unfertilized egg. And the weirdest thing of all is embryophagy, and that's where all the eggs are fertilized, and the first ones to hatch then feed on their siblings. And so ultimately, after many larvae may be gestated, only a few will survive predation by their siblings. And that's found in tiger sharks and white sharks. Okay. Did I miss something? I did not. Okay, so pectoral fins in sharks, as I mentioned earlier today, they tend to be kind of rigid and wing-like, at least in sharks. Rays are a little bit different. They can be moved, but they're not really collapsible like in the ray fin fishes. And they're basically stabilizers. and they set it in a sort of angle so that it generates lift. Sharks and other chondrichthyes don't have swim bladders, so to maintain their position in the water column, they have to swim. So the first major group of sharks, the subclass Holocephali, order chimeriforms. These are the chimeras. They're a strange and little known family, or excuse me, order with 3 families and about 50 known species. They're deep sea predators with a single gill opening. They don't have a stomach, and the upper jaw is not fused to the neurocranium. And so that is a real distinct feature in these, because in other sharks, the upper jaw is fused. They have tooth plates for crushing mollusks and crustaceans. They feed on the bottom. And they have a particular interesting and unusual looking egg case that's very singular. And again, it's adapted for its environment. These egg cases are adapted for being laid directly into the sediment. And I have a video here from Mbari down in Santa Cruz of one of the first views of them. Let's see if it plays. Doesn't want to play. All right, moving on. Sorry about that. You can look at it later. It should play on your end if it doesn't play here. And so the other major class of sharks are the elasmobranchs. And there's 12 extant orders in elasmobranchs, many species, 1,162 extant living species. They're characterized by 5 to 7 pairs of gill openings that are separated. They're not like the fish where there's one operculum and many gill rakers. The upper jaw is not fused to the neurocranium. Sorry, battery is running low. And as I said, so they have placoid scales, tiny small scales, which we've discussed before, no swim bladder, but they have very fatty livers. And the fatty livers serve a special function. They essentially help to create buoyancy. We'll see this in other species as well. This like intense fat is non-compressible and it tends to be neutrally buoyant. And so it helps sharks be able to maintain position in the water column. And the phylogenetic relationships of sharks, of elasmobranchs, are controversial because they don't fit nicely and neatly into each other. But what we'll use is this, this general schema that I've come up with here. And so it's modified from Nelson, and it'll get you into a conversation. It'll get you in and out of a conversation with the fish biologist without too much trouble. We break up the elasmobranchs into the Galea and the Squalia. The Galea are the classic kind of shark form that you're used to. Squalia are the rays and skates. And then these are the major orders that I'd like you to be familiar with for each group, and I'll kind of fly through those. Starting with the Galea, the heterodontiformes are the bullhead sharks. Erectolobiforms are the nurse sharks. Lamniforms are the mackerel sharks, the classic predator shark that you're familiar with. And the Carcharodontiformes are the ground sharks. And so let's spend a little bit of time with each. This is a bullhead shark. There's one genus and 9 different species. They appear really early in the fossil record. But they've never been terribly abundant. They have distinct dorsal fins, usually set apart from each other, 2 dorsal fins set far apart, and a very blunt, square snouts. They tend to be nocturnal, and they're piscivorous, living mostly on rocky reefs. And I don't know, they wiggle when they swim. I guess it's not very shark-like. It's not very macho, and so people complain about it. I don't know. Anyway, they're very cute for sharks. The other order is the Erectolobiformes. This includes 7 families. I'd like you to be familiar with the Ginglia Mastomidae, which are the nurse sharks. There's 3 genera of nurse sharks. They have brownish coloration, dorsal fins on the back side of the body. They're nocturnal, and they rest in small groups over sandy habitats. They have a small mouth with a very large oral cavity. And this is interesting. It acts as like a vacuum cleaner. And this unusual mouth allows nurse sharks to rest in place without having to move. Most sharks don't have the flexibility in their jaw structure to be able to push water through across the gills to be able to breathe. The nurse sharks are an exception to that because of the shape of their mouth. They're able to use it like a pump and move water actively across the gills. Other sharks rely on what we call like ram ventilation, that is swimming to move water across the gills. Okay, another family in this same group, the Erectolobiformes, are the whale sharks. Whale sharks are the largest sharks. They tend to be epipelagic out in the open ocean, and they're extremely large, 11 meters in length, the largest fish on Earth. And they're thought to be very fecund. They found a female with 300 pups. Good to note, it's not a whale, it's a shark, even though it's a whale shark. And they're planktivores. They filter feed, like many large animals. They get their nutrition by filter feeding. They don't really have teeth to speak of. Instead, they have very fine gill rakers that pick up zooplankton. They're thought to live quite long, like many sharks, and they have a pan-global distribution, but they're declining. The IUCN classifies them as endangered, and that endangerment seems to be increasing. Climate change, boat strikes, and fishing are probably all to blame. You can swim with them, but I don't know, maybe you should leave them alone. It's become a commodity. It's become a business, swimming with whale sharks. The lamniforms. The lamniforms are the mackerel sharks. That includes 7 families and 17 species. And they include some of the familiar species like great white sharks, mako, and thresher sharks. Their characteristics include a very pointy snout and a very fusiform to thunniform spindle-shaped body designed for long migrations as well as high-speed attacks. They lack nictitating membranes, which is the membrane that folds over the eye to protect it in attack. And they have 2 dorsal fins, including the classic shark fin that you see cutting through the water. Large mouths because they are intense predators. And one of the members of this group is the family of Olopiidae, the common thresher shark. This is found worldwide in warmer oceans. They tend to be up to 20 feet. They live in offshore waters and they prey on other fishes. And they tend to be in tropical waters, and they have this long, crazy whip-like tail that they use to thrash through schools of fish to frighten and disorient them. Let me see if I can get it. Oh, dang it. I wanted to show you this one. Now it's not even coming up at all. It's just, oh, there we go. I do. Yeah. Is it worth it? Yeah, this is worth it. This is worth me screwing up my whole technological thing here. But you're still not seeing it. I think they're seeing it over there. For some reason, you can't see it. Why is that? Now you can see it.
Iron length of its body, the slender elongated top half of its caudal fin has evolved into something of an unusual but highly efficient hunting weapon. useful whip-like motion. Rushes are able to stun, maim, and even kill small fish prey. This technique is referred to as tail snacking. It is believed to be the shark's primary method of hunting. It likely evolved to overcome the difficulty of hunting one small fish at a time, as the sharks here captured 3 fish on average, sometimes as many as 7. Its effectiveness comes from both physical contact with the fish and the wave force generated through the water. It is also speculated that sometimes these slaps are so powerful, they break apart water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. Like many sharks.
That sounds sensational. But it could be. So the thing with, let's see if I can get the screen back up here. Oh dear. All right, well, you'll have to go in presenter mode with me for the next few slides since I'm running out of time here. So the thing, one of the challenges that predators face in schooling fishes is, how are you doing this? You know, I should know not to do that. Okay, there we go. One of the challenges that sharks face when they're, or any predator faces when they're dealing with schools, is that schools of fishes tend to be really disorienting. And so the thought is that as the school clusters together, it provides some kind of protection for those of, essentially, you're shielded by the fish that you're schooling with, and the changing morphology of the school provides some kind of refuge, and it disorients the predator. And so thresher sharks essentially evolve this mechanism to get around it. They don't have to look or try to identify one fish. They just come in, they flip, they snap the tail, they bust up some molecules of water, and they kill a few fish at the same time, and they go back and collect the fish. So what a weird adaptation that they've developed. Anyway, so onward. Let me make sure I'm actually sharing with the people at home. Sorry for the clumsiness of this. I'm not. But now I should be. And I think I'm even sharing with you now too. Cool. So finally, also of the Lamnidae, Carcharodon carcharias, the white shark. These are pretty awesome predators. You know a lot about them because you've been forced to know a lot about them. It's just part of pop culture. They're large, they're long-lived, they're a major predator. They have a pan-global distribution. They migrate extraordinary distances. They don't really eat very many people, maybe 10 a year, which is not bad. Well, really, I mean, 10, I mean, it's, like it's just a few people. I mean, well, this is the thing, right? This is what I started out with. Like, what's the risk you want to take? Much more of a risk to go drive back to your house after you've been in class. Much more of a risk to bicycle between 10:50 and 11 o'clock on the UC Davis campus, right? There's many more risks we take, Much more risk to go and eat sushi on certain days with the wrong chef, I mean, there's lots of risks. This is a very small risk, really. And probably they're not really targeting humans either. I don't know if that's a comfort for you, those of you who like to swim or surf in the ocean. They're probably targeting sea lions. This is what one hypothesis is. And then if you're out there on a surfboard in particular, you've got this kind of fusiform shape, and you've got this like tetrapod thing going on with all 4 limbs out there. And so from an animal down the bottom looking up, they're like, it's a sea lion. And so they go up and they take a bite, sometimes of the board, sometimes of the person. In spite of their presumed intense predatory nature, they're threatened, like almost all the animals that we're talking about today. They tend to be vulnerable. Why are they so vulnerable? Because they're huge. They don't become reproductively viable for like 10 or 20 years. They have long gestation times, and they don't produce many offspring because they're oviviparous. ovoviviparous. And so all those things that have worked so well for them for so many millions of years don't work very well with intense fishing pressure driven by fossil fuels and recreation. Okay, last order here. Check my time. I've got like 2 minutes left. Let's talk about carcharaniforms. The ground sharks, which is the most speciose order of sharks. There's 8 families, about 50 genera. It's a difficult group to characterize, might be a garbage can classification where we just lob them in there when we don't know what to call anything else. All these species tend to have 2 dorsal fins, 5 gill slits. These are narrow details that probably don't matter to you. But also in that group are the Spherinidae, which are hammerhead sharks, which have another really weird adaptation, the extended eyes that go out on the edge. They're probably supported by lateral lines and ampullae of Lorenzini, but there have been many hypotheses, but really not much understanding as to why they have this really extended eye base out from either side. Some people have suggested it's like a secondary sexual characteristic or a display. Other people have suggested it's prisensory. I suspect that it increases some kind of perception, but I don't know for sure. And the next group are the squalia, and I'll talk about those on Wednesday.